Yes, we are talking about 10 of them, focusing on climate change theme. Believe me, it has been almost a year putting together. In that sense, it is not an overstatement to say that it's a dream come true. The one today is the 101st webinar of the series focusing on how COP28 dealt with urbanization and cities. As you know, INHAF is running for the past 3 years this webinar series. Though in such initiatives, numbers do not matter, but completing 100 of anything is a milestone. We are happy having done it and are using it, not only planning more, but also evaluating and assessing whether the effort, time, and energy being invested of a very small organization has been worth it. We are using this phase to think through how could we do it better and in a more efficient manner. So that's the process we are going through at this point of time. This series on cities and climate change with a special focus on Chennai. And as you may not have heard it, let me tell you that it is an integral part of INHAF's project called Climate Chennai, Climate Chennai. We are on this project for more than a year, and as this is the first webinar of the series, which is to serve and service the project, I must tell you briefly what are we doing under this project. I would just mention very quickly 8 thematic areas we are exploring in Chennai. One is understanding Chennai city's preparation to meet the climate threat by knowing who is doing what among the key stakeholders, what government is doing, what civil society is doing, what business is doing, what industry is doing, what private sector is doing, what are they doing. Second thing is to sharing that information and knowledge with the concerned people. And we are doing it with a series of compendium. We already have done one, and we'll be out with the second one pretty soon. Third thing we're trying to do is to build a platform for sharing, learning, and co-action. This is an intention. This is the desire. We're not really gone very far, but this is certainly want to attempt. Identifying specific areas of advocacy for mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Fifth thing is studying the city's master plan, and my colleague Karthik can have done some work on this, and master planning exercise through the climate lens, looking at the master plan through the climate lens, and this has not happened before. Sixth thing is working on with others when possible on decarbonization strategies and plans in selected areas. Next is studying the state and the city's policy and action agenda for the vulnerable communities. And the last thing is undertaking pilot action in selected vulnerable communities, both poor and non-poor, to develop tools and methodology of participatory work that engages the concerned communities meaningfully to define its challenges and arrive at solutions working with the authority. So these are the 8 areas we are trying to kind of work with in our project in Chennai. Now, Dr. Raghunandan, who is moderating the session today, a person we are very, very fortunate to have with us to guide us on this work. He will tell you more and in greater detail what we're trying to do in this project. While he does that, let me, however, tell you briefly why we are doing this webinar series. For the past 3 years, now this third year running that we are running this webinar series, and what are the main considerations which has propelled us to do this webinar series. There are 5 main assumptions, and this to me are very important, and I continue to kind of repeat them in webinar after webinar, because that is the message of this webinar series. That number one, despite being engines of growth and centers of culture, technology, knowledge, and global attention and investment, our cities are not in pink of health. Be that small cities or big cities, industrial cities or commercial cities, district town or state capital, whichever, our cities are not in good health. And whether we are looking at environment or water or governance or planning or slums or housing or rivers, they're all saddled with major challenges. This is the first thing that we had in mind when we planned this series. The second one, which I think is equally important, that not only we have problems, the cities as they are and the way they are growing and developing do not look like meeting the challenge of unprecedented urbanization India is witnessing. It neither looks like providing safe and healthy quality of living to 870 million people who will be there in our cities in 30 more years, almost double of the current population, and does not look like delivering on 7 to 8% economic growth the country expects to get rid of its poverty and emerge as an economic superpower. So on both the fronts, in terms of giving quality of life to the people who are there in our cities and delivering 7 to 8% growth, because if you want to kind of, deliver that kind of growth, you require cities to be efficient. So that also doesn't look like happening. The third, very important, the government effort, and government obviously is doing a lot, is not adequate enough to ensure healthy, livable, productive, inclusive, and sustainable cities. The fourth part, which is the raison d'etre of this particular initiative, is the wider society. The human capital outside the government system has the required skills, required knowledge, required experience, and even motivation to contribute meaningfully and search for alternative approaches and new solutions. So the last point that we have kept in mind while thinking this series is that we are fast running out of time. And therefore, we need better approaches and innovative solutions as early as possible, because delay is causing enormous harm to the planet, to nature, to environment and people. So this 5 consideration is the one which has propelled us to be doing this webinar series. But the main purpose of the webinar series is part of a wider national societal effort aimed to bringing in not only fresh ideas and new perspectives, but also new voices and a new collectivism, a new togetherness, new partnership, and new energies in articulating the need for and ways to rethinking our cities, both redefining the urban challenge and finding more effective ways to addressing it. So that is the whole rationale. We're trying to kind of, build a societal partnership through this effort. As I said, we do not know how far we reached, but we certainly are making an effort. So before I hand this over to Raghuji, I must thank the distinguished panel today. That includes Tikendar Saab, Aravind Dr. Manala Sen, who I understand is not able to join, and Rajneesh Sareen Saab from Center for Science and Environment. Thanks for your time, and thanks for making it to this important webinar today. And of course, I also must thank my colleagues, Karthik, Binduji, Bhumaji, and Chitrakshi for behind the scene very hard work. So thank you very much. And Raghu Saab is all yours now.
Hello and good evening to everyone. Welcome to this first of our series of webinars. The first two webinars, this one and the next one, would focus on more general issues. The subsequent seminars, about 8 of them, will focus on specific sectors, whether it is sectors on adaptation or sectors on mitigation. And during those sessions, we will have speakers both from Chennai as well as from outside Chennai, so that there is a sharing of knowledge and experience, both of what is happening inside the city, which is our focus, as well as what we can learn from other cities or from an all India perspective, and vice versa. And we will be announcing the details of each of the webinars and providing links to them so that all those who are interested in specific sectors also can join in those seminars and participate in them. So what I would like to do, if Karthik can help me to put up my small presentation, I don't want to go into the specifics of the what happened at COP28, etc. I will leave that to our eminent speakers who are here. I would rather like to set the context for this discussion in broad terms and frame some issues which I think are thrown up both in general on COP20 on urbanization and climate change issues, and specifically from the major outcomes, etc., of COP28 with regard to urbanization. So it's not going to be a long presentation, not much details, but really in terms of posing some issues. So Karthik, the next one, please. Yeah. So the first slide, as you can see, is talking about urbanization and the COP process. And there has been attempt over the years to bring in discussion on urban issues in the COPs, particularly at COP27, Sharm el-Sheikh, and now at COP28 in Dubai, where we have had rather focused discussions, posing fairly specific proposals, etc. They have had a meeting, a ministerial meeting this time at COP28, and a statement signed on to by more than 70 countries here, plus a couple of other events. We were particularly keen to have Dr. Mona Lisa from ICLEI joining us, because ICLEI was one of the sponsors of one of these major events at Dubai. So it would have been very nice to get her perspective. Unfortunately, she's taken ill in this very unpleasant weather we are having now in Delhi, and she's not able to join. So that was the first one of these major events, ministerials, etc., which took place at COP28, which heralds perhaps the beginning of discussions on urban issues becoming part of the regular discussions at COPs from now onwards. This, I believe, also heralds the start of a trend of sectoral discussions on the sidelines of the COP, but not so much even on the sidelines as trying to feed in to the COP process and see that discussions on these sectoral issues come into the main COP processes. And that was evident this time at COP28 because you've had more than seven major declarations, statements of intent on different sectoral issues. There were some such at the previous COPs as well, including in Glasgow. But this trend, I think, has got solidified at COP28, and you've had 7 or 8 major sectoral declarations and discussions. Why this is something that maybe some of the speakers could sort of address. I feel that there are two perhaps possible reasons and two expectations that we may have from such sectoral discussions. One is that I think people are wanting more action on climate, and looking only at national perspectives does not seem to satisfy the drive for more action. And people seem to think that we can get more action more quickly if you address sectoral issues, like the discussions we had at COP28 on health, on waste, on methane, etc. The third issue that I wanted to highlight was that this is a part of a process seeking to mainstream urban issues and perhaps look for some targets inside the COPs on urban issues. Now, this raises some issues which I'll come to in my subsequent slides, but I just want to flag that issue here for the moment. And one of the issues that is thrown up by that is looking at subnational partners, subnational governments or entities as key partners in the COP process. So this time you had a large attendance of local bodies, of mayors, of governors, etc., as key partners, more than 1,000 of them in some of these meetings. And even the declarations, the outcome statements from COP28 also gave a major push to this idea of wanting to see subnational entities as partners in this process, both as part of the process involving the national governments, who are the main parties to the Framework Convention as well as to the COP. They are the parties of the COP, but the subnational governments as part of this process is also becoming mainstreamed in this. And it was noticeable that India was not part of these processes, nor of these 6 other sectoral discussions. India has had, rightly or wrongly, a fairly firm idea dating back quite a few of the COPs, that dealings at the summits, at the COPs, should primarily focus on national governments, and that dealings with subnational entities or sectoral targets should really be left to the national governments to decide, rather than targeting them, which officially India seems to have felt that it would jeopardize the sovereignty and the internal processes of national governments. So India has never been particularly keen on targets for sectors being specified, which you will have to report on, etc. Not particularly happy about subnational entities being part of the main process. But we can discuss these as we go along. Next, please, Karthik. Yeah, so there were some programs that came up there. I will not detail them. The first was the Surge program, which was enunciated at COP27. And this time at COP28, the CHAMP program, which was on multi-sectoral partners coming in, which I touched on, and maybe some of the speakers would be throwing more light on these two programs that have come up regarding urban actions. My sense is that although there is a fair amount of talk in these programs about building resilience. The letter R in the surge stands for resilience. There's been a lot of discussion on impacts and on adaptation. However, I get the feeling that a large part of the emphasis in these programs has been on mitigation. And perhaps there is reason for it. It's been frequently highlighted that about 75% of global energy consumptions come from cities. So it's a very concentrated location. And therefore, actions which are taken at cities can have fairly quick results in terms of reduction of emissions. In many discussions on climate, including in the IPCC reports, it has been the urban issues have been highlighted as being critical to efforts to tackle climate change and to reach the Paris Agreement targets of limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius or less. And in fact, some have said that the battle against climate change may be won or lost in cities. And that's one of the key drivers behind the idea to drive a lot of the mitigation targets through actions in cities. 5 key areas were highlighted in the surge process, which have been referred to in CHAMP as well, which align with the Sustainable Development Goals and the targets for 2030, which, as you all know, has equity as one of the cornerstones of the approach. And these 5 key areas for climate action in urban areas are buildings and housing. And we are very happy to have Rajneesh Sareen here, who heads this division at Center for Science and Environment. Then we have energy in the cities, waste sector, mobility and transportation, that is, and water. And you'll be glad to know that all these above issues are key issues that have been addressed under our Climate Chennai project. And you may access our key findings till now. As a first iteration, we have developed an approach paper to towards tackling climate change, towards climate action in Chennai, looking at both adaptation and mitigation. And this is available at our website if you go to the INHAF website there. Next, Karthik. Yeah, so I'd like to highlight some issues for India, which of course do not figure in the COP28 documents or outcome statements, but something for us to think about, and maybe the speakers would like to reflect on this as they make their presentations. The first is the attempt to look for action by subnational governments in order to boost the targets announced in the national targets, the NDCs. One of the major decisions of COP28 was, which arises from the global stocktake, was that by 2030, all the NDCs need to be upgraded, the targets need to be raised. So the issue is, can we look to subnational governments as a key driver for raising targets, particularly, for example, in urban areas, or look at sectors to do this? That's one. Second was the idea of looking at subnational governments to form a key part of formulating and implementing national action plans for adaptation, national adaptation plans. Now, India has been a little slow off the gun, if you like, on national adaptation plans. We have not formulated such plans. There was the earlier drafts at COP28 almost seemed to make it compulsory that nations should submit national adaptation plans by 2025, but that was sort of toned down in the final Dubai consensus document. But I think it would be a good idea if we started in India working towards such national adaptation plans, because Without that, I think it will be very difficult to implement many of the desired actions for adaptation and for building resilience. Uh, Both those above link with subnational projects and financing for those. And that is going to be a key issue in India, I think, because those of us working here on climate and those working on urban issues know that we have serious problems in terms of the division of finances and the division of powers between the union and the states. And this often poses itself as political problems, but there are serious administrative and governance issues involved here as well. And this would impact our urban governance issues, where again we have major weaknesses. And if we are to tackle problems in cities, problems in urban areas, then I think this becomes a key issue that we all need to address. That city governments in India, in most cities, barring just a few, have problems in terms of a shortage or lack of independence for decision making. There are very few urban bodies which can really claim to be completely independent. Most of them are quite dependent on state governments for finances and for actions, for policy drivers, and so on. The second issue, as I said, is a shortage of finances and the ability to raise finances through taxes. And you would see from most discussions internationally, including on climate, when cities get together in different countries to discuss this, the extent of autonomy and the powers of mayors, like in cities like London or in US cities or Paris, to take independent action on their own leaves Indian cities far behind in terms of how much action we are able to take at a city level. And the last of these issues is the well-known weaknesses in our 74th Amendment, giving powers to urban local bodies compared to even where the 73rd Amendment has taken us in terms of rural self-governance bodies. I think these are some issues that concern me that I think we need to look at in order to understand how we can work towards serious and major climate action in urban areas, and also bring these in alignment with what have been spelt out at COP28 and COP29, regardless of whether we are part of it, we are signatories to that statement or not. But we can certainly take those outcome statements and declarations at COP27 and COP28 as guidelines for us to think about how we are going to approach urban climate action in India, and look to drive our national plans, enhance our national plans, both on the mitigation and on the adaptation front. Thank you very much. I'll stop there and I leave the field open to our speakers who may or may not take these issues that I have raised here into their presentations, but I hope at some level we will be able to look at these issues as we proceed. So thank you all, and I think now I can call our first speaker, Dr. Rajneesh Sareen from Center for Science and Environment, and the floor is yours, Rajneesh.
Thank you, sir, and good evening to everyone. Just give me a second so that I can connect and share the slides. Okay. So I think there is a lot of discussion points which are already given by Raghuji as well as Kirtibhai. So which puts up a lot of things in our context in terms of, yes, there is a climate mitigation as well as adaptation which needs to be rethought into the cities at this moment. So because these cities are becoming one of the heat centers, as well as there are issues, because what's run on the header of this PPT is what's the theme of this, where there are a lot of things which you can say is coming through COP as well as are coming through the city experience. So I've been working with cities almost, I can say, probably now from last 23 years. In fact, I started my profession with cities only when ICLAI was actually taking shape in the India, and I was like maybe joined ICLAI initially on those days, where I used to work with municipal corporations. So climate change was a subject which was not sold to the cities at that time also, and is not being taken as a product by cities still at this stage, because at that time it was efficiency which was being sold to them largely. So mitigation was a tool which was, so money was something which was more, you can say, the area for cities to look at. And today, when we reach here today, and the impacts of climate change are visible, adaptation becomes another area for us to look at. So climate challenges are very clear. There is scarcity which is there with regard to water. We know that a lot of people are going to sit outside the thermal comfort. Heat is increasing. So water, heat, all these scenarios are coming up, as well as you can say, moment the heat is increasing, there is a GHG call which is coming, a lot of emissions are going to be there. And in fact, this cooling demand and requirements are projected to be increased in terms of like more currently whatever the consumption which is there between India and China, our cooling demands are going to be equivalent to that. So there are various scenarios which are being projected at. And as well as you see that India largely, or the area where we belong to, there is a lot of heat which is getting, extreme heats are coming. And so the small and medium towns becomes one of the important area for us to look at from mitigation opportunity as well as from adaptive. So urban environment and built environment. Again, I don't want to repeat this because there is, in any case, under the COP, there is a huge syllabus which has been given that you have to work on physical infrastructure, you have to work on ecological, as well as you have to work on form, zoning and all, which is, I think, which is an action which is being looked into the Chennai space also. So what I'm going to do is I'll give you that, just moving on from these maybe initial dictats of that what is happening, what is net zero, or what, I don't want to get into it, but yes, definitely, I want to place that where India stands right now. When it looks at net zero as one of the commitment, we do have some documents, we do have certain policies, we do have certain amount of directions which is coming, but certainly they all need to be stitched very well, because right now what is there is like, yes, context is coming into the papers, like Cities 2.0 is another program. We have National Mission on Sustainable Habitat. We do have a strategy which is coming in terms of long-term, low carbon development, as well as India Cooling Action Plan, which was there in 2019, ECBC. So some good news is there. But definitely, so these are demands, or maybe these are the actions which is being expected, but how they really translate into a city environment, they really translate into the physical world, that is something which is challenging. So over the period working with the cities and with the latest amount of issues and concerns which we see, what we do see as city are right now facing a lot of heat and a flood vulnerabilities at this moment. And this needs to be largely integrated with the master plans, because right now we do not have a clear context of this, and cities are whatever is coming to the city is like unprepared call which is reaching out to us, and we are not prepared for it. Second, where cities needs to work at from all these mandates which is given is like materials, envelopes, orientations, ventilations, and blue and green infrastructure, which lacks, which largely you can say neighborhood and building scale level we need to work at. And then there's another demand which comes from a space cooling and requirement. We need to start internalizing. We need to bring in efficiency, as well as we need to focus, because this is coming from ICAP specifically, is not in kind cooling systems. So one is that you have a mechanical or machines-based system cooling, and other is that you try to explore. I'll get into these details so that you get a fair idea about what I'm talking about. So when I look at climate framework for urban habitats, looking at IPCC reports or from whatever are being discussed in COP, and as well as based on the knowledge which we gathered over the period, we know there are vulnerabilities which are increasing, there are adaptation which needs to be done, and as well as there is a huge pocket of mitigation which needs to be carried out, which has like mix of energy, water, wastewater, air pollution, solid waste, and all these components come in. I'll pick up only few here, because looking at the paucity of time or the requirements, I will only pick up certain indicators so that you get a fair idea of what exactly CSC is doing, or rather is intending to do in this direction. So what we have done is we mapped the cities to see how these temperatures are moving. So land surface temperatures are almost increased from a range of 2 degree to 5.5 degree, and these observations are already made into the certain cities like Jaipur, Delhi, Pune, and Kolkata. The variants are very clear. We know that cities are becoming hotter. I was like actually hearing from that there's no snowfall which is happening in now in Himachal or other. So we are getting, and these results are showing up to us. It's not only that these cities which are there in plains like Jaipur, Delhi, and Pune and Kolkata. In fact, there is a heat wave which was there in Shimla as well this year. So these contexts are becoming very clear, and we have seen one or two such kind of variation in the past, but now these trends are becoming very prominent. Now, when I look at these centers, what we have done is we've taken 45 degree and above marks based on land surface temperatures, 9 years of the total data, 6 year breaches the mark, we call it as a heat center. Right, so at least 6. So what we have seen is 42% of the Jaipur is right now under heat centers, Delhi around 35%, Pune around 82%, and Kolkata to some extent because of penetration of water bodies which they have, the 12% of that area is largely coming under as a heat center at this moment. Right. So what we do is we look at the heat centers, we look at the areas of blue, green as well infrastructure, and try to look at most affected areas out of it. Try to super extrapolate, look at the human population largely, which are people below poverty line, slums, and the vulnerable groups like children who are below the age of, or between the age 0 to 6, because that's where you don't have much of defense systems with you. And then look at the infrastructure preparedness. In case this heat goes up, what kind of roofing materials are being used, what kind of infrastructure which already there, and then try to look at, okay, based on this, what is the most exposed human which are there? And this is one of the examples which we have done in Kolkata city specifically, to look at how these wards level data could be extrapolated to have a fair understanding of that heat has penetrated to how many wards. Like for example, around 46% of Kolkata is right now moderately or highly vulnerable to the heat at this moment. And this takes care of various indicators which are there. In fact, we go deeper into the sites also to try to see that if there are two comparison of so there are certain like open mid-rise, compact mid-rise, these heat centers where they are. So how these heats are getting compiled from. So we look at the comparison of exposed green and blue infrastructure. We try to look at shading as well as exposure components. So shading, primarily the component of sky view factors, aspect ratio, tree canopies and all. And exposure, we try to look at building, impervious, pervious, water, surface green and all, and try to compare why there is a 4 or 5 degree variation between the two morphologies which we have in urban. So that means there is somewhere the composition has gone wrong. We need to have a fair understanding, because this needs to translate back into the bylaws to a great extent. So bylaws needs to have a modification, or your design principles needs to have modification. We need to have a fair understanding. Other component which we looked at so far is one of the very important is complete street design and things like those. So far we have a lot of street designs, but we are not working on thermal comfort on the streets at this moment. So streets are shading is not a component which is being looked at right now. We do have a street infrastructure. We do have what I see largely, in fact, there's one improvement which has been done in Delhi, which is right outside our office. It's like all MS structure which has been put. You know there is a heat. You are not adding any shaded devices. Rather, you are adding inappropriate materials which are adding further more heat into the ground. So MS structures are not appropriate for such kind of things. So that means you need to bring shading, you need to bring those components. So what we have done is in one of the streets, looking at different times of the day, what is the shaded components with regard to it, and what best we can do to increase the shade on the street. Because if there is an ambient temperature, if it's not heating up on the street, it will not heat up inside as well. But if streets start heating up, it is going to be automatically similar thing, we'll walk it. The other area which I want to highlight is the flood vulnerability. Here, what we have done is there is an elevation model, which is again based on the data which we have for cities. We try to work at slope elevations and as well as water bodies in green, even to look at the road density, built up density, as well as water logging area, bring up the sensitive lands, bring up sensitive population, and again look at the ward-wise infrastructure in terms of preparedness, in terms of pumping stations, structures, access to information, schools, and other facilities which you require in case you are being impacted from this. And then again, coming to the ward-wise level, trying to understand. So what we understand is, because in any case, this was very clear that Kolkata is impacted with the floods. Whenever the situation comes, we know what are the perennial reasons for that. And now it is more impacted because why? there is a lot of, you can say, submergence or the filling of or reclaiming of the land, which has happened over the period. But now we need to have a fair understanding how much of this Kolkata is being impacted by the flood at this moment. 96%. It's moderately or highly or moderately sensitive to the flood there. And which is like a fact which we know it very well. Now what we have to see is how we improve this and how fast we can bring a strategy with regard. Then the other area, which is now the neighborhood and building scale, when I look at, what we have done is, I take you to Telangana for this. What we have done is we've gone to the various affordable housing schemes for that. We look into various government methodologies which were being looked at. Like, for example, thermal comfort is required, ECBC residential was there, National Building Code is there, and other methods which try to give us so that how robust our structures should be there with regard to the rising heat episodes. And if you actually look at the red part of it, it's mostly because of the energy transfer. So that means materials are not holding the site to great extent. That was one. Second, our designs are not in proportions. Like, for example, when I simulate the building and look at from lighting penetrations or the daylight penetration, it works well when it's not in context with the site. But the moment I put it into context of site, this drops to the level that it's almost like you're dependent on, there's hardly any natural light which is penetrating. Then we even look at these neighborhoods from the perspective of wind penetrations, because effectively thermal comfort will arrive, or if you open the window, you get the wind which strikes into the structure, then only there will be some level of comfort which will come. If structures are not placed or oriented well, or are not done very well, so there is an issue. There is a wind outside, but it's not striking to your structure, or it's striking too bad that it's so windy that you can't even open up. So mostly 60% of the layouts are going in the wrong directions. And this connections of forward and backward of these materials also we look at and try to see what compositions could be worked. Another area where we look at is space cooling requirements. We know that there is an increase of space cooling, which is there. 40% of residential heating and cooling right now is consuming the energy which is being used in our. And today, for example, this air conditioning demand, whatever we have, it's going to be 11-fold in coming future. We understand that today, if we have one AC per person, it's going to be 15 AC per 100% in future, which we expect. So that means there is a huge amount of load and penetration of these products are going to be there and anticipated until unless a directional analysis is not done. So currently what is happening is, with the poor sense of architecture as well as poor sense of implementation thought in our mind, the only direct solution which we have is bringing an air conditioner, which is not climate sensitive, which not only brings up more heat into the ambient environment, but also consumes a huge amount of energy from it. Now, this is the safeguards, how it's going to be there. So we have done one book called Cooling Web, where we try to understand the nuances of this. We try to look at microclimate, we look at form, we look at envelope, we look at apt technology, and then try to bring comfort back to you. So this is where you can say we judge the ECG of that particular area and try to see that what works and what doesn't work. So this is where the traditional architecture or our way of thought or our traditional way of thought process of designing were also in this similar fashion. So there is no straight step which goes. So if the ECG becomes straight, then the person is dead. So my subject, I don't want to be dead at this stage. That's why I don't like these straight lines of that you straight jump onto one air conditioner. So with this, the final concluding points which I have is, there is an agenda of action which we need. City needs to develop a new approach for urban planning. So we need to have a master plan, which definitely, but prioritization has to be more onto green and blue infrastructure. We cannot work with that proportion of whatever 10, 15, 20% or whatever. So demand is very clear. World Bank is clearly, there's a very clarity which is there from Indian perspective as well as internationally, that you need per capita of the green space. The cities which has around 10 to 12 square meter of per capita green spaces, they are much more resilient to the climate change intervention. But when you try to see how much penetration is there within your cities, the percentage are much lower. So that means we not only need to make new cities with these protocols in our mind, but also needs to enhance that how these brownfield projects which we are bringing up, instead of just intensifying, we need to bring certain more green and blue infrastructure in that. So there is a retrofits which these development needs to take place. There is a need for affordable housing bylaws, specifically for affordable housing, because the reason is that is the sector which is depending on natural or nature much more than any other, because any other person who can afford more can go for any of the mechanical systems to make his stay comfortable. But when it comes to affordable housing, you need to bring up what is best available with the design, layouts, and features available for you. Then we need to institutionalize the climate action, because that's where reduce the cooling load into structure so that you have a climate appropriate designs and systems with you. Material innovation needs to be taken care. And there is an instrumentation in terms of accountability and disclosure needs to be done. So far we are talking about schemes like PAT scheme is there, trading is there. Yes, there is, but we do not have any kind of benchmarking or additionality proving with us. We don't know what is our benchmark at this stage of the country. What I can say is efficient and what I can say is inefficient and what is the better for me. But largely, which 70% is residential or the construction which is happening by self-built housing. You need to bring in certain amount of accountability and disclosure in that so that we are clear, okay, we are building and we are going in the right directions. And then there has to be a push for combined cooling strategy for heat mitigation. We need to look at, like, for example, Telangana is right now doing cool roof programs, so cooling materials, water sensitive design, heat action and mitigation. So these are some of the actions which cities now need to graduate on. See, whether you like this subject called climate or not, it doesn't matter at this moment, because this is a matter which is going to really you need to depend a lot on. If you really want your adobe to be there, your stay in the towns or the wherever you're staying needs to be prolonged, then you need to take certain action, which is a joint, you can say, a requirement, not only for city administration as well as for individual at this moment. Cities are being now judged. I think I'll just go back now onto the, I'll stop the screen sharing, but cities are now coming onto a new level of mandate called performance-based systems. So cities needs to perform until unless they do not perform, because under 74th constitutional amendments also, it's the city needs to perform. The mayors are getting more responsibilities, or cities which are performing only are the ones which are being looked high under those commands. So today, when this 15th Finance Commission is giving you performance granting, they are giving you for air pollution. They are giving you right now for waste management. They are giving you for construction and dust. So that means already cities are now being looked from a performance subject. And these subjects of performance are right now, they don't even have a constitutions to with them. So they are struggling, they are working. But I think with this, I end and say that cities now need to wake up to this call, which is being pushed on them, both from climate change perspective as well as on internal performances.
Thank you very much, Rajneesh, for that excellent presentation. I think the presentation makes clear that, as spoken about at COP28 as well, the approach to climate action in cities needs to be holistic. It cannot be piecemeal, just looking at one or two aspects, but must take an integrated look at all these aspects and look at both those elements that can address specific climate change related issues, as well as look at livability and equity issues as well. And unless these sort of trifecta come together, we will not be able to realize the kinds of solutions that you're looking for. So once again, thank you, Rajneesh. And let me also remind all our other participants, viewers, both here in our panel, as well as on YouTube and Facebook Live, to put in questions in their respective formats, which I hope our friends Karthik and Dr. Bhuma would be able to keep track of. And those that come up here, we will take them up at the end after all our speakers are done. So next, I'd like to call upon Aravind Unni from the Indo-Global Social Service Society in Delhi. And Aravind was there as one of the active participants at COP28, and he's written about those issues as well. So about 15 to 20 minutes, Aravind, you'll be okay with that? If you've got a presentation, we can help you put it up. Otherwise, go ahead with your remarks.
Perfect. Thank you, Raghunandan. I think, no, I will not be probably taking 15 to 20 minutes. I might finish sooner than that.
Don't do that.
No, no, I'll make my point. I'll make my point.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Perfect. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity, and it's a pleasure to be amongst you all, and especially to hear such a wonderful, nice presentation by Rajneesh to like really dissect and tell us with numbers, facts, figures, maps of what really needs to be done and the efforts taken by them. So a pleasure to be here. The little sort of, what do I say, thoughts, insights from our experience in COP is what I would be sharing here in front of you. Our experience as in IGS's experience as an organization that works on urban poverty issues with urban poor working population in cities. Essentially, the insights or the sharing here by me would focus on vulnerable communities and their location within COP28 like deliberations and their locations within the climate actions that the state or that the central government is taking within our cities. And it is in this intersection that the talk would be directed upon. And what do we do to better kind of center stage the issues and challenges of urban, vulnerable, poor communities who are really at the receiving end of climate impacts in our cities. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And it's something that Rajneesh had already shared. So firstly, I think the first point being that the fact that I will adjust probably to kind of reiterate the fact that cities that house more than 70 to 60 to 70% of world's population right now have at least now found some strong mention, like Raghunandan mentioned, in COP, in its deliberations, in the local climate action summit, in the nomenclature that was very, very visible in the declarations, as well as in GST text, nomenclature of local communities and multi-level actions. So I think that is a very positive set of terminologies that is kind of getting added to the climate change policy at a very international level. And it has a huge bearing for us as civil society organizations and as urban practitioners to like really grab those terminologies and put them into action and into practice in policy and in practice in an Indian sort of context. So first take would be that India, of course, has a very strong position nationally and takes a lot of attention and eyeballs in a COP like event. And we have also claimed that we would want to host a COP33 in India. Whilst we do that and whilst we claim for a lot of things nationally, our arguments of us meeting targets on renewable energy and emissions and other things well in advance of the timelines that we have set for ourselves, like 9 years, 11 years was the claim. That kind of makes us really think that are we setting the right targets? Are we setting the right targets that have to be achieved? And when you know that India is one of the better performing countries at an international or a global level, then that makes us ask the question to ourselves and when we are participating in COP-like forums, that are we as bunch of people and as are we as nations or at a global level taking climate action seriously? Because if you are meeting targets 9 years, 11 years well in advance, that begs the question that are we like really serious about that? So that was one point that I really wanted to be sure about. Second, I think when India is posturing and asking questions on what do you say, common but differentiated responsibility at an international level, I think India also should be highlighting the challenges that we face inside as well. And that common and differentiated responsibility is also applicable to us. So what happens to informal communities, urban poor communities residing in slums, informal settlements, urban homeless, urban informal workforce? That's the mainstay of our cities and the reason why our cities run the way they run. They are not really part of the debate at an international level. And that is where I think our public or international posturing comes into our conflict of what our lived realities are. And those are the things that need to be changed. And when that change would come in, that is when we would really help at an international level to articulate and help COP28 like deliberations to really talk and further of how do you take local communities into participation? How do you really engage with local communities? And how do you really talk about multi-level action? I think India is then that, in that sense, very well placed to probably play a very strong leadership role at an international forum. And that is where the comments are coming from. Where are we going wrong? A few pointers on that. One, we are very ad hoc with our planning at this stage. Like our friends have mentioned, we are doing a lot of climate action interventions which do not really engage with our communities, our people. We are putting in a lot of money on big infrastructure projects, which we are not saying that you should not put, but we are also setting up examples like Mumbai Coastal Road Project, which has been classified as a maladaptation, prime example of maladaptation even in IPCC texts. That is where we are going wrong. And the scale that we face of 10,000 odd cities or 15,000 odd cities, at that scale, you really have to think that how much centralized national, how can a nationally planned NDC or a national adaptation plan NAP would really roll out without the support of ULB. So these are the big questions that we are dealing with. And add to that, all other cities are making climate action plans, but climate action plans are not in tandem with the master plans. They are not also in sort of sync with the other action plans like heat action plans, so on and so forth. And in all of these plans, you don't find much mention of urban vulnerable communities who are the most hit and most impacted. So few pointers. This is based on a piece that I had written from my experiences in COP, sharing them of how can we really center stage urban vulnerable communities that we need to look at within the debate on climate action in Indian cities, but also maybe in structures of COP-like deliberations, what could be rethought. The first point is the whole aspect on looking at how do we eliminate urban blind spot that exists. Yeah. So look at NDCs, for instance. You have to like really struggle to get a strong mention and a strong sort of substantial attention to urbanization issues. It doesn't exist in NDCs. And that needs to change. If your national determined contributions are not talking about urbanization at length or in clarity, we cannot expect that will have the same ripple down at a city level. So that needs to change. And we are very well positioned because NDCs are going to be revised in 2025 as per the mandate in COP. We better get our act together and change that because we now have enabling terminologies in a lot of texts. Point number one. Point number two, urban local communities do not have a say in COP. They don't have a say. And they don't even have a say at a national level or at a ULB level. So how do you view climate action and how do you really recognize that urban local communities need to be a part of climate action? Because unless and until we involve people, involve their actions of how they live, how they consume, how they make themselves resilient, there is no way that India at this scale is going to deal with climate change impacts. This means that COP, which has constituencies and parties, does not have a constituency that recognizes urban poor, urban vulnerable group, in spite of the fact that we could be the most marginalized bunch of people. And similarly, when India talks about the efforts that India is taking, but India should also then highlight the impacts, the challenges that the urban vulnerable communities experience, because we have such a huge constituency of that. So how do you really ensure that urban vulnerable local communities find a seat at COP? And on a like a lighter note, if you go to COP and COP28 like spaces, leave alone urban vulnerable communities, one burger there would cost 2,500 rupees, 3,500 rupees. How do you really expect any community participation there, where everything seems to be kind of rigged and only inviting state or richer civil society organizations to participate. So something that really started out as a much more open, deliberative space for climate action has now become a more state-captured, lobby-captured space where even the access to urban vulnerable communities does not exist. Second point, third point rather, that there the very good examples of Rajneesh of how he showed that we need to have vulnerability assessments mapped for cities, and how do we do that? How do we ensure local ULBs get those executions done, those vulnerability mapping done is the real big challenge for us, and we need to do it at scale, and they need to come in and join the different action plans that we do. So at this stage, if you ask ULBs, which are the most vulnerable spaces, I don't know. I don't think many of our cities would have such a data itself in the first place. Many of our cities do not even have topography plans, topography maps. How are we going to even map these vulnerabilities? So clearly, doing this at a scale to have vulnerability mapping across our cities is the next big challenge. Fourth point, loss and damage has been a lot of our debate. But are we then talking about daily loss and damage that urban vulnerable communities face? Let me give you an example. Street vendors, from our anecdotal references, and we are carrying out a research, have shared that they lose about 30 to 40% of their income in summers when they are doing street vending, and their incomes are lost because their material is not much value because it dries, it gets spoiled, so on and so forth, and they have to use additional water, electricity, fans, so on and so forth. So when we are debating about macro level disasters, it is usually the informal sector workers, informal urban poor communities whose daily loss and damage is not even accounted for. So unless those accountings are done, and when we are having this wider global debate on loss and damage, what happens to the loss and damage that communities face? How are they going to be compensated? There is no mechanism as of now that talks about these aspects, and all our laws, let's say the Street Vendors Act, predates this seriousness that we are seeing in the last few years and the impacts that we are seeing in the last few years of climate change. So that that daily loss and damage aspect needs to be really accounted for. Fifth point, that 74th constitutional amendment has 18 functions. We now, maybe some people would say that what is the point of debating about 74, 30 years, it's not been implemented much. But if there was if there was a better time to really push for decentralization, this is the time. And maybe this is the time to add a 19th function of climate action and give the responsibility to the cities, give a devolution of powers to the cities, to the communities, because that is where climate action has to be also executed, supported by national level policy. So we need a 19th function for 74th constitutional amendment, and that could empower ULBs as well as communities. Second last point from my side, all our communities are informal. Our worker groups are informal workers mostly. So we are essentially talking about 50 to 70% of our cities. So global South cities, not just India, not just Bangladesh or Pakistan or cities around us, we are primarily informal in nature. But the solutions that come, the policies that are there right now, primarily address the formal. They talk about concrete buildings, of how they should be designed. I'm saying primarily, I'm referring mostly to what the state does. Primarily referring to what the state does. And so all the solutions are focusing towards bettering the formal live and work spaces and travel spaces, but whereas informal live and work spaces are seen as encroachments, are seen as aberrations, something that have to be removed in a classical environmentalist and a protectionist perspective. But that needs to change. We have to realize that we are not developed global north countries who have a lot of money. We need to like really formalize and make solutions, develop solutions, or recognize that informality is the solution that we have at this stage. And how can we improve informality and recognize them and take them towards the path of recognizing them as people-built solutions, people-based solutions, something very similar to a nature-based solution, which has actually become a very fancy fad these days. So how do we recognize informality and people-based solutions as the way forward for our climate action? Last point from my side. I think urban planning has been very well debated about. It's outdated. It's sad that we are talking about cities in 2024 and we have to depend upon town planning acts of 1960s and 1970s and that you know the acts that view development as concrete and building and grey infrastructure, very rightly mentioned by Rajneesh. But that also needs to, other than the blue and the green, it needs to bring in the people. Where do the people really engage with these plans? That's absolutely not clear. Whilst we are again debating about urban planning reforms, the urban planning reforms document doesn't really much talk about climate change. I was surprised. It's a 2021 document. I think I hope the iterations that are happening on it will have that. And lastly, that climate action plans right now for cities are mostly on paper and they are not legal statutory documents. Their linkages with master plans are not there. It doesn't exist. So how can you give a legal tooth to these climate action plans and get to ensure that master planning, climate action plans, on all those plans that exist, converge for climate action cells, something like that Rajneesh mentioned, and they have to have real powers as opposed to making reports that just translate into, you know, spot fixes or some more electric vehicles. That really doesn't address the big challenge that we face. If we do this, and if we figure out how are we going to deal with our posturing internationally and to really highlight these urban vulnerable community challenges at an international level, because that will help the world in that sense to make these decisions at international level. Unless we do that, I think India will lose this opportunity to like really lead the climate change discourse. So I think these would be the set of sort of observations, comments that I had to do. I will share a link of a small piece that I've written. I'm happy to be part of this and looking forward to the questions. Thank you. I might have taken more time, Raghu. I'm really sorry.
No, you're all right, Arvind. You're fine.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you, Arvind, for that very insightful presentation. You brought forth many important points, particularly the integration with urban planning, and perhaps even more important, making the urban planning people-centered. I think that was one of the focal points that Arvind was trying to make out. And Arvind, I will ask you as well as Rajneesh, both of you just have a look at the Q&A, at the questions posted there, and be ready with your responses to them. There are some fairly long questions addressed to Rajneesh, and there's one just now addressed to Arvind. So please have a look and get ready with those. So now I'll call upon Tikendar to make his presentation. Tikendar is former deputy mayor of Shimla, short-lived experiment in direct elections of mayors and deputy mayor in Shimla. He is one of those who participated in that, and he is currently now a member of the Urban Commission in the state of Kerala. Tikendar, over to you.
Thank you, Raghu Saab and Kirti Bhai. I hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is, because we've had in fact, four, prolific experts speaking, right from Kirti Bhai, who is the lone survivor of the first National Commission on Urbanization. Kirti Bhai, I'm sure there's no other left, no, of the first urban commission that we had. So yeah, so very rich experiences that he has. And then, of course, followed by Raghu Saab, and then Rajneesh and Aravind. So I'm not going to enter their domain of expertise. I'm going to share some stories, some very funny anecdotal stories, just to give you how I understand these things unfolding and happening. And the first story is about COP15, where I was an official delegate into what they call the green zone. And, there were lots of hopes being raised that COP15 is like the landmark COP. And many things were happening, but very disturbing also, Kirti Bhai. Trump walked out. And, everyone thought, now if the biggest polluter, historically the biggest polluter of the globe walks out, then there's no point that we are going to achieve. And there I remember one of my friends who was the mayor of Boulder, the city of Boulder in Colorado, Applebaum. He and I, we were together making our presentations. And Applebaum said, Tikendar, don't worry. Trump doesn't run US. The cities are run by us. And we will make it sure that we defeat this whole idea of, the idea that he was trying to raise. And, the rest is history. They defeated Trump. They brought in a new Green Deal. We all know what that new Green Deal is about. But just to give you a glimpse what cities mean, in fact, and who have been, some of them who have been the driving forces in what Aravind was mentioning in COP28 as well, where they're really trying to reclaim their spaces in this whole spectrum of climate talks. So I had really great hopes, and and then so the point is, I think one point which needs to be reiteration from my angle, that climate is a political question. So we have to handle it politically, till the time it becomes a political question raised in our debates, in political discourses. And in the political discourses, there's no mention on climate change. That's the first part. The second part, why I say it's a political question, because I go back and try to bring in some of the documents, particularly from the Labour Party in England, and just go by their manifestos. What does the manifesto say? Not to mention the mayor of London. All that what Rajneesh was trying to say and Aravind was trying to mention, why cities are so pivotal. But if you see the manifesto, they have gone to an extent saying, Kirti Bhai, that those companies who do not abide by whatever green according to them is green will not be allowed to trade in the stock market. We don't hear such voices here. Why don't we hear such voices here? Because that's a political question. And we know Labour didn't succeed, and we have a different. So that's the first point, I think, right from Applebaum to the new Green Deal to this whole bunch. But so Raghu Saab, what I want to do is to do a very generic stuff here, because I think I again have to speak in the next webinar. And I was supposed to speak there, not here, but I was literally forced by Raghu Saab ke aapko yahan bhi bolna hai. So I came here. The second part, Kirti Bhai, which would be little annoying and which would be little problematic to many of our friends here is, and I go back and say that it's also, apart from political, it's a systemic question. It's also linked to our systems. And when I say it's a systemic question, now that has also been substantiated by IPCC 6. Of course, they do not go into that definition, but I would like to go a little further. And when I say it's a systemic question, I go back and try to revisit Karl Marx here. Because when Marx was writing Capital, and this whole bunch of idea of creating a surplus and how accumulation of capital is going to happen, and where, Kirti Bhai, that accumulation was supposed to happen. that was supposed to happen in the cities. This whole question of industrial revolution. The industries were supposed to come in the cities. But there, I think one thing which we miss, and that is where I revisit again the whole question of where he brings in a very interesting equation, and he says that the struggle against injustice equals to struggle for humanism, which finally equals to struggle for naturalism. So your naturalism, inequality, and humanism are all interconnected. That's my point, Kirtibhai. Why do I say so? And again, going back to the generic, because when I was talking about Appleworm, I come back to my town in Simla, Kirtibhai. There are people who are doing a door-to-door survey, climate change and its impact on the people. And do you know, that really scares me. They are the largest impacted, we in the global south. I'm not sure whether that is the story across the global south, but I can 100% say that that's the story of our country. Particularly of Indian cities, where I have worked for, where I served a city for 5 years, and Rajneesh was saying that he joined ICLEI, and that's how, and I think that's the point that he mentioned, that people hardly knew. The city governments hardly knew. In this survey, Kirtibhai, you will be astonished to note that not even 5% of the people, the working people, knew what climate change is. They are the ones who are largest impacted. So how do we create that niche, that's a scary picture, and to me, if you honestly ask me, the mother of all sciences currently is going to be the climate science. If we do not act now, I think it's going to be a very big existential crisis for all of us, particularly for what IPCC is pointing out in the Indian subcontinent, the Himalayas and the coastal cities. We have seen in Himachal Pradesh and in Uttarakhand last year, where we lost some 12,000 crore rupees and we lost some 500-600 human lives. And since October, we've not had any rain. There's no snow, by the way. So no snow means, again, we're not going to have any water. So I think it's a serious question, which really haunts me, honestly speaking. So when I say it's a systemic crisis, I think I go back to the whole process of building what are cities meant for. And I don't think it requires, requires that huge data to explore. Then the last 40 years, the carbon emissions that have taken place across the globe, of the 40% emissions that have taken place in the last 4 decades, the 40% emission comes only from 30 largest transnational corporations. And some of those transnational corporations are still funding some of our climate action, what we call greenwashing, something of that sort. So I don't think it's something that difficult to understand. But can we do that? And some of the laggard states like Canada, imagine, what we were doing in Dubai. So I think I'll come to COP a little later, but I think that's a generic sense to me, unless and until we are able to address. And that's, Kirtibhai, my problem is, what are our cities meant for? Are our cities meant only for capital accumulation? Of course they are. There's nothing wrong in it. But when they generate this surplus, in that generating surplus, because I think, how do we A, democratize it, and B, how do we ensure that while generating the surplus, at the same time, we are also climate resilient? And as Raghu Saab rightly pointed out, this IPCC, why I'm going back to IPCC time and again, because it's really proclaiming a disaster in the offing. What is it saying for the Himalayan cities? It's saying that, look, earlier you had extreme climate weather events, which were once in a century. Now we are going to have 100 in a century, which means every year you're going to have. Are we adapted to it? I know we are not adapted to it. And the current model of development, that's why I'm saying what our cities are meant for. The current model of development further enhances the vulnerability. I do not see any ray of hope in the current development model, which is quite centric, top-bottom, which is quite, for large infrastructure projects. Take, for example, Aravind was mentioning about, I just forgot, what was he mentioning about? I think the Bombay stuff. I mean, take, for example, the Char Dham Yatra that is happening in Uttarakhand. Take, for example, the widening of the roads. Have they ever gone back to the communities and asked that, is it desired? The national highway, the four laning of the roads in the national highway. And then these roads wither away. For 2 months, 3 months, there's no movement of the people. And so the point is, A, we are going to have far more frequency of extreme weather events. B, the current model of development, instead of adapting to this whole process, which is there, which I think we require a larger framework to understand, which we require a rather larger role to play in the whole process of mitigation, we are further enhancing our vulnerabilities. Now coming to COP28, I think, what is it? I mean, right from COP15 to 28, I think I see some of the people pointed out that, look, they said it's a great ray of hope. Why they say it's a great ray of hope? Because they say it's a beginning of what they say, the end of the fossil regime. At least something came out. Some pointed out it was a damp squib. I mean, there's nothing that happened. And we've also seen that it was also the GST that we talk, not the GST that we have in our country, but, the whole process of global stock taking, which both Aravind has written and I have also written one of my articles that was published on COP28. And what is it that the GST is pointing out? Because that's how COP28 was very important. The GST states that the target that we should have achieved by 2030, we are not even, that should have been somewhere around, somewhere around 40 to 50%. We are not even 14% of that target, which means that we are going to further enter into a phase of far greater vulnerabilities. And this is not difficult to point out that 2023 has been a year of the highest recorded temperature on Earth. So July 4 was the highest. Then July 5 was higher than July 4. If I remember correctly, July 6 was higher than July 5. And then 7, of course, was little down. And then July 8 was another highest. And I don't think that I need to mention those anecdotes, that what India and Bangladesh has always been fighting amongst themselves for an island in the Bay of Bengal. Kirtibhai, that island is gone. That's already submerged. So we know where we are. We also know. And again, I go back to the whole question of industrial revolution. Why is it that we are not able to bring in the people around? Because I come from that stream. Why is it that it's still not become a people's movement? I think one of the reasons, there are many reasons to that. And without that, because when we are preparing, Kirtibhai, these climate action plans, I think we should not minus the people, because ultimately it's the people who have to own. And of course, that integration that Rajneesh and Aravind was pointing out. By the way, Raghu Saab, just don't forget to, just tinker me when you think that I'm really nearing the stipulated time. Okay?
You're okay. Tikendar, you've got another 5-10 minutes.
Okay, great. Thanks. So I think I would be able to. So I think one of the reasons, and I go back to the whole question of systemic, because it is this era of our human evolution, because all the eras previous to capitalism, that's how I say the Industrial Revolution is the era of industrial capitalism, has been where the man-nature dialect has been extremely important. Be it feudalism, be it any other system, we were part and parcel of nature. It is this era where we rob human beings, man, from this whole process of nature, and we create our own nature, and that's where this whole process of accumulation takes place. Now, can we alter it a little bit? Can, in these climate action plans, in this generic formulation that I've tried to build, can we just bring people back to this whole bunch of discussions where, in the process of planning, we just bring them to this whole idea of nature. Else what is happening? You have the hottest year. Else what is happening? You have pollution in the cities. Else what is happening? I saw the AIMS director writing an article 2 days ago that the lungs of even in very young born people in a city like Delhi are no more pink. I mean, that's I mean, even if now we are not able to alert ourselves or understand, I think it's really a catastrophic proportion. It's not that easy. It's really catastrophic. It is not just that we'll be losing our mountains, or it's not just that the cities would be submerging. It's a question of whether I mean, the whole process, whether we will be able to live more, because it's in that sense how I look at the whole process of the current development model. So I think why cities are important, because the cities are important because we consume the largest form of energy. And when Marx wrote Capital, I go back to Marx Kirtibai, at that time when he was writing Capital, we were just 5% urbanized. Just imagine. Now we are 56% urbanized. And when COP1 was taking place, we were 46% urbanized. Now we are almost, as we said, 56-60%. In another few years, can we stop urbanization? Is that the way how we are looking at it? Or if we cannot, then what needs to be done? I mean, these are the questions. These are the questions that I want to lay forward. I do not know. I mean, because Kerala is experimenting. I'm part of that commission. I saw some of their ideas. They said, oh, we are already 90% urbanized. Now we want to stop it. Isn't in this dynamic process, will they be able to stop it? I do not know. But I think this process of urbanization, the process which we are unfolding across the globe in India, is the process for capital accumulation. Whether we started from Industrial Revolution to the fourth revolution, that is going to be artificial intelligence, how do we alter it a little bit in our climate action plan? And climate change is part and parcel of this entire juggernaut. Unless we are able to address that, or unless we are able to enter that domain which we normally refrain because of various reasons, I do not think that we will be able to create much impact. And that's what I said. I'm not getting very pessimistic, but I'm really scary, Kirtibai, now, because things are not going the way you and I want things to happen, where cities are more livable, where you walk out, where there is more, where you walk out and okay, where they are secure and where there is certainty. There is a huge amount of uncertainty. What kind of development are we building then? So I think, so when we look at COP28, I think there are certain voices, those voices that come from the European nations. They are trying to reclaim their spaces. And those spaces, they say, look, please give us our share. Whether that is going to happen, I'm not sure, because, cities are not sovereign countries. But when we come to the global south or to India, what can be done? I think Aravind has very rightly pointed out, what about our NDCs? Why can't we just intervene into the NDCs and say, look, once you prepared your commitments, please get us on board. Now, Kirtibai, what you are doing in Chennai, I mean, it's quite strange and quite astonishing to note that a zero emission target, Government of India is, just correct me if I'm wrong, is 2070, isn't it? And Chennai target says we are going to go to zero emission by 2050. I mean, even if that is like, in a haywire, but it's really ambitious. So why can't we really propound it further? Why can't we just, and we also know how difficult it is. I mean, for Chennai to be zero, achieving those targets by 2050. But again, if I go back, what are the tools? What are the structures that we're looking at? You have the All India Mayors Council, which is completely defunct. I haven't heard a statement or a word from the All India Mayors Council. Then what are the structures that we create? I heard Rajneesh ji saying about something about, the 15th Finance Commission, Rajneesh ji, and we are writing to the 15th Finance Commission, is draconian. Because one of the interventions, so that's why I said, this entire structure, this entire architecture, quite top bottom, where the Finance Commission tells you, okay, this is the way how you have to go. I don't buy that, Rajneesh, for the simple reason, because what your 15th Finance Commission is arguing for, it's saying that if you do not increase your property tax, which is commensurate to your GST collection, then you're bound to lose grant. Already we are in the middle and cities are losing grant. And I've gone to the 14th Finance Commission also, where 20% of the total outlay was not even, absorbed or allocated. So it's a complex situation, Kirtibhai. I mean, you've headed the National Commission of Urbanization, but it's really complex to work in Indian, because we are, say, 34% urban, but my friend Chinmay, who's a migration expert, you should get him on board, by the way, sometime to speak. Chinmay Tumbe, who's written a book called India Moving. He teaches in IIM Ahmedabad, and I quote him because that's not my figure. He says, we are already more than 50% urban. It's not that we are 40%. We are already 50% urban. So the point is, how do we revisit this architecture of urban governance? And this architecture of urban governance cannot be divorced from, the whole question of climate or the whole question of development. To me, I think, Kirtibhai, we need to revisit the 74th Constitutional Amendment. And when I say revisit, because Aravind, it's not that easy what you're saying, that the development plans, for heaven's sake, you should know that none of the cities prepare those development plans. These development plans are prepared by, even if you have to go by the 1960s or 70s definition, town and country planning, these development plans are prepared by large tech consultants. So that's another fear that I want to enter, and the domain that I want to enter, Kirtibhai. This large tech solution, I think, is one of the scary arenas that we are entering. Okay, so you just clap your hands when you move and the streetlights would go off. Oh my God, that's not going to impact climate change. Okay, so that's what we are witnessing. Okay, so, and of course, this whole bunch of convergence, integration, and that's, I think, one of the arguments that Rajneesh was mentioning. I've 100% agree to that. Why can't we have a climate action plan preceding a development plan? I don't know whether you said that or not, but I think if that is what you meant, and when you're building those climate action plans, or maybe how do you build, not parallel, but converge both the things? For example, what kind of building typologies, right? You rightly pointed out, because the building typologies that you require in plains, we require exactly the inverse for the mountains. Why should you have more RCC? Why should you have buildings that really consume more energy? I mean, you come to Ladakh, and there we have experimented, because I wrote the vision document for Leh. We experimented all through indigenous materials, simple technology. When it's -20, -25 degrees outside, you can still have +16 by doing some scientific maneuverability. I think that is what is required. But how that is to be done, Kirtibhai, if you honestly ask me, it has to be a very bottom-up approach. That is the only way. I think cities, Kirtibhai, here I have a difference with you. Cities are not just engines of growth. And because the moment you say engines of growth, cities are meant for capital accumulation. Cities are for people, and people are for cities. I think this arena we have to be, which is extremely climate-driven, inherently humane, and I think one of the ways could be, and that what maybe we would try to do it in Kerala, maybe in Tamil Nadu, some of the states where you can see something happening, because without this convergence, cities can't just act, because we've seen climate action plans. Simla, we created climate atlas, Kirtibhai, once, so there's no institutionalization. What do you do in such a situation? You move out and the climate action plan is dumped into the dustbin. Likewise, if we do not want that to happen, I think there, at least if it's not central, because things move from the center, we all know that, right? From 60s, 70s, and I saw your document, the National Commission on Urbanization. I mean, you've magnificently captured all that. But if you have to alter that now, and the phase, and which is really scary, honestly speaking, then I think that kind of convergence, or that kind of wedlock between the cities and the provincial governments, what we call the state governments, is quintessential. Else we will be preparing these plans. Now, Kirtibhai, what you're doing, already C40 has done it, okay? That climate action plan for Chennai. And I've seen that, I don't know whether anyone is even looking at it. But if what Chennai you are doing, that climb at, and then you are able to build, I think that would be a great exercise. But as I said, it has to be extremely nature guided, what Ian McHarg wrote 1960s, or many others. And it has to be people-centric. And I think people have to be the core in this entire developmental process. Have I left anything? If I have, maybe next time we'll be able to cover. But I think it's an important area, and cities are the future. And when I say cities are the future, it is like, and cities can't survive if we do not address this whole bunch of questions. I don't want to go into this binary of adaptation or mitigation, but I think in global South, in India, adaptation is the key. And Simla, I'm really fearing, because we've not had any snow. Very soon we are going to have this whole crisis of water like coming up. And what do we do in such a situation? And, earlier in the villages, we still had that capacity, Kirti bhai. Last word, Raghu sahab. So, that resilience of the people, when we were in villages, Kirti bhai, we always used to fetch water from the streams. Now the generation, not my generation, but the children generation, they do not even know that water flows in the streams. And if we ask them to go back once they don't have water to the stream, it's extremely difficult. So it's a really challenging situation. And the scientists are pointing at us that, look, that is going to happen. And unfortunately, we are not prepared for that. My take is, how do we create an atmosphere or create an architecture where we are able to bring in people at the focus and make it a political question? That's all, Raghu sahab. Thank you.
Much, Tikendar. And thanks to all the participants. There are a few questions which have been typed into the Q&A part, and if I can just run through them and direct them to specific speakers, I'll start with Rajneesh. Rajneesh, there are 3 or 4 questions which I think you are addressed really to you, and which you could take up. First was, so you showed charts of temperature rise and so on. A questioner wants to raise the issue of discussing not only temperature but also humidity with that, and so just your comments on that. Secondly, the questioner also talks about shading and building materials in construction of the buildings, in the building envelope, etc. So maybe you could take that up as well. Yeah, just these questions.
So the question is very good, that relative humidity actually plays an important role. That's why when you look at West Bengal, there is only some percentage of West Bengal which is under impact of heat. So humidity helps as well as can aggravate as well. So when you look at LST, there is an atmospheric water component is also part of it. So it's part of the analysis which has been taken care of. So the only thing which you need to is, sometimes you need to go a lot of ground truthing, because relative humidity and atmospheric water component, they vary, and you need. So we have done certain level of ground truthing also to recalibrate ourselves accordingly. That's one. So in any case, shading, when I mentioned passive design technologies and techniques, these are like one of the very fundamental geometrical design.
Yeah.
Shadings and all these becomes one of the very fundamental things to be looked at. So far, whenever we work with state, specifically with building bylaws, many people say that you have a holistic ECBC performance, but we always, from a CSC angle, we profess that materials as well as geometry. Show the gains which you get from geometry first, then show what you gain from the material. Then talk about rest of the things, because most of the time the efficiency of mechanical system dilutes that. So you bring an efficient air conditioner system and you say my EPIs are much lower. But we are not looking at that reality for India at this moment. We are looking at where our building performs to the natural climatical conditions which are outside. So your geometry and your material becomes one of the very important components. So this whole thing, when you say that when you run models earlier, they were not on the uncomfortable hours. So CSC pushed this, that you run these models to calculate what are the uncomfortable hours which you get in a naturally ventilated building, so that a thermal comfort could be worked at, because efficiency and thermal comfort are not the same thing. So when you were running models for energy efficiency, a refrigerator is the most efficient product which you have. but it doesn't allows you to breathe. But when you run it for thermal comfort, definitely it's altogether a very different perspective, which takes care of geometry, shading, and all these requirements which are part and parcel of it. So we try to work and differentiate. So may not be very clear at this moment to you, but this is where the whole narrative of the country is also changing. We are now talking about thermal comfort for all based on the 2019, you can say the requirements, which are very relatively new. We do not talk about now efficiency as only product which we are expecting from human habitations in that case.
Thank you, Rajneesh. May I just add one small thing for the questioner? The relative humidity is an extremely important factor, and this is normally read through what is called wet bulb temperatures. And heat waves, unfortunately, in India continue to be defined not by wet bulb temperatures, but by max-min temperatures. So you have 40, 40 plus, etc. Now the WHO has defined that anything crossing about 38.5 wet bulb temperature, 38.5, is considered almost beyond habitable limits. And for your information, our study in Chennai has shown that Chennai is already crossing 38 to 38.5 in wet bulb temperature. We are already at the threshold of survivability, and maybe the first region in the world to have crossed that limit because of the high humidity. And if you add urban heat island effect on top of that, then I think you are really showing the potential immediacy of the risk problem there that definitely needs to be addressed. We then have a couple of questions from Michael Slingsby, in several questions, in fact, talking about different aspects of buildings, etc. He's talked about building materials. He's talked about heat flow through the buildings in terms of shading, etc. I think Rajneesh has spoken about those, but Rajneesh, if you want to throw light on in a couple of minutes to those questions, you can speak of those in terms of use of building materials and shading, etc. in building envelopes.
See, one of the slides which I've shown is it has a CFD analytics. So it's basically you try to look at the the wind flows from one structure to another, which goes. Now this is now there on the BE website as well. So this is something new because the wind hydraulic is getting locked. So most of the time we have a complaint that cities are currently the air pollution load is also not going out. Because of the extra amount of FAR which we give it on the outskirts, they act as a mountain. They lock. And as well as when we design also within a neighborhood, is most of the time there is a central park and there are tall structures outside. So wind hydraulic is something which is not being studied at this moment. London is the only city which has been designed based on wind CFD analytics. So this is now a component which has been added by BE. This is based on the interventions which we have done and as well as various other like-minded institutions has done that we now need to work on. Because effectively the heat which is outside or the comfort which is outside needs to flow. So then only, or flush out, then only you will gain much more comfort analytics in this. There was one more question which was on internal temperatures. So CSE is part of one of the committee done by World Bank as well, it's a WHO, where we are looking at the healthy housings. So healthy housing, there is no internal benchmark so far for temperature with us. So we have 3 different benchmarks for temperature for naturally ventilated, mixed mode, as well as air conditioning structures, which is under the NBC as well as is there on the ECBC, which has been adopted for there. But we need to come up with a very stringent benchmarks, then only a performance of a structure could be associated with. So till we do not have, people have their own choice and methods. But there is under NBC, you have temperature range, which are particularly given for every important city in India, where they've given you 3 different, as I said, naturally ventilated, mixed mode, as well as for air conditioning.
Yeah, I just want to remind viewers that in this webinar series, we'll have one webinar specifically dedicated to buildings. I'm hoping Rajneesh will be able to join us for that as well, and we'll have other experts joining us for that. So those who are interested in buildings and built environment, please join us for that. We'll also have one webinar specifically dedicated to urban heat island effect, which is also both the buildings and the urban heat island are part of our study in Chennai. Those interested may please look at our approach paper on that area. There's one question which has come from Mike again, where he's talking about coal-fired power. I don't know if any of the participants would like to address that, although it's not been part of your presentations. Will any of our speakers like to respond to that? Why a country like India or Bangladesh would continue to rely on coal-based power? Would any of the speakers like to address that? If not, I can take it up very briefly.
I think this is an issue of energy poverty, which many countries are facing, or even in the face of what recent shifts has happened. Many countries has gone back onto their original or maybe the tracks which they have taken, they have gone back on it. And this is a reality which has been discussed many times. The energy poverty which has been created because of the recent circumstances are pushing government coming back onto the variations which they already thought and processed at. But I've actually, instead of commenting on that, I commented on the next one, which was that how these temperature inside into the structures and how we can make arrangement with regard to, because the question was that when you have these energy requirement within the structure, when the women are going to stay there for longer, then is there a energy requirements, how this could be met and all. So that's why I said that healthy housing criteria requires, because you have vectors, you have other things, but you have temperature also becomes one of the very important aspects to be looked at. But we do not have an internal indoor temperature conditions very clear at this moment. But yes, anything which is lesser than human body temperature or closer to that becomes one of the things which we work at. In any of the structures which we work, or we try to look at that even 32, 33 is a good enough temperature when you work on these. So that's fine.
I think Rajneesh wanted to say something.
No, I'm saying that until we have this temperature range being fixed internally into the structures and some mandate comes on it, till that we have to follow whatever is there under the NBC.
Correct. Correct. Okay. A very brief point of information on coal. See, this is one of the crucial issues that comes up, particularly when you talk about equity between nations. The point that Tikendar was raising just now. See, every country has to depend on the resources that it has to generate power. And those countries which have oil and natural gas think it is okay to use oil or natural gas. You go away from oil, but it's okay to use natural gas, even though that also is a fossil fuel. The problem that countries, not only like Bangladesh, India, but China also, is that our basic resource that we have in this country for power generation is coal. And it will take time to phase out coal. It cannot be done overnight, because it basically means then overnight you shut off all power in the country. You cannot have an entire electricity grid running on renewables alone. So the transition is on, and there's already moves. India is already committed to having more than 50% renewables by 2030-35 in our NDC. So I think the transition is there, but I think we should not have single out coal as the one fossil fuel which is the most dangerous. All fossil fuels are threatening. It depends what you have. And coal is in fact showing a resurgence even in Europe, in the UK and other countries there. So that's a complex issue which requires a wider discussion. Do any of these speakers want to have some last remark on it? Would Kirtibhai like to come in with some last remarks before we close this session?
Yeah, Tikendar, please, Aravind.
Yeah, Tikendar, go ahead.
I just looked at one of the Q&As, I think, so I thought maybe I should respond to that. Q&As or chat, I don't remember.
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, I think it's in the comment chat section, and I think that's exactly was my provocation. What what has been asked. Now, what do you do in such a situation where 5% of the people, and actually this system has created such a situation where only 5% of the people maybe know some of the nuances. They're not even aware of, but actually they are the ones who are the worst impacted, as Aravind also pointed out. I think what needs to be done is from the climate action and from people like Aravind, from people like all those who are leading different organizations, is what I say, revisit the right to the city. So when the city is being built, I think it is not just one small piecemeal, but when the city is being built, I think they have to reclaim their spaces. And that reclamation of the spaces, and that's why what I've always been saying is treat city as a factory. And if you treat city as a factory where phenomenal surplus is getting generated, and where your futures are being decided by someone else, I think it's a high time that you should decide and try to reclaim your spaces for deciding your own future. And you have phenomenal number of organizations, workers' organizations, trade unions, informal sector. Aravind, the informal sector would only speak about informal workers. Yes, that is what they have to do. But I think they also have to enter this domain, because this is going to be, according to me, the mother of all sciences. You cannot just leave it to some of, of course, you have technocrats on both sides, here as well as there. I mean, you have people who would be, and Raghu knows that. Raghu, when we were doing this webinar on Joshimath, so you had scientists who said, no, there's no problem with that hydropower generation. Yeah. Okay. So I think that reclaiming those spaces is something very important. I think that is all that I have to say. It's a long way to go, as they say, the famous English song. But I think even a small milestone achieved would be a great victory in this whole existential crisis. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Thank you. There are two other questions which Karthik has reminded me about in the Q&A. They probably came way up there, so it escaped my attention. I'll quickly read them out and let's see if any of our panelists respond. We have only another 5 odd minutes to go till 8 o'clock. So I'll take up these two questions as the last questions we will before any closing remarks. The first question is, Detroit is in the process of implementing land value taxes to improve land use or density. How could India follow suit? I'd like Rajneesh or anybody else, somebody with an urban planning background, to maybe respond to this. And the second question is, do you feel that recurring Chennai floods should be considered eligible for the newly established loss and damage fund allocations? Aravind has answered this, the questioner says. Aravind has answered this, but suggested that other panelists also talk about it. That we will take up maybe after Rajneesh has tackled the first question about land value taxes as a tool in better urban planning. Rajneesh, would you like to take that?
Yes. So innovative financing under that this particular taxing regime, which is land value captures and things like those, are something which India is right now working on it. But so far it has been more utilized when it comes to metro or the greener products which we have. So, and in fact, the transit orient development is the one which, as well as now, I think form-based codes where they're trying to look at. But yes, innovative financing has a lot to do when it comes to the future of the requirements, which is going to be there, because when you look at sustainability, you don't have any direct funding for it. When even for climate change action plans or whatever we are talking right now, we don't have a clear funding lines with us at this moment. So when I said 15th Finance Commission, I never said that whether I like it or not. I only like the component under that is there is some money coming for air pollution. There is some money at least is now coming for the subject which nobody looked at. So that is the only silver lining which is there, which was good. And I was not commenting on the complete scheme or the policy at this moment. Right. The only thing is, yes, we need innovative financing because sustainability do not have a direct funding at this moment.
Yeah. Quite right. Do it.
I understand Arvind wanted to say something. Arvind?
Please, go ahead, Kirtibhai.
Arvind?
No, my point was primarily related to what Tikendar ji was saying, and the point on the 5%, just knowing the fact that what is climate change. So we did a research on impact of heat waves on urban poor population working groups in cities across 16 cities, I think. It was very surprising that similar finding that that a very few small bunch of population could relate to the wider issue of increasing temperature, so on and so forth, to heat waves, and then through heat waves to climate change, whilst around 70% experienced losses at a family household level, ranging from around 2,000, 3,000 to 20,000 rupees a season. And these are population groups that are earning 10,000 rupees a month and have had and have five members in the family to feed. So it is a challenge that as civil society actors, as people who are all part of the system, to really think of why that only 5% are even able to articulate the fact that their temperatures, or the fact that they are falling more sick, they have different healthcare issues, which they can feel on their skin and in their lived reality and life, but their articulation is restricted, primarily because I think that is where the challenge is. The challenge is, how do we really break down the science, these very fancy international texts and documents, climate action plans, which are all up in air for communities. They don't have terminologies in local languages to tell what is a heat wave and how is that different from a loo. So that shift of how do we equip communities to articulate and to assess their impacts and then engage with the process, I think that is going to be the biggest challenge, like Tikendar ji mentioned, to really addressing climate change bottoms up. So that was one point that I had to put in.
Thank you. Thank you, Arvind. There was one last question on loss and damage. If anyone would like to respond to that, the question is, do you think that the recurring Chennai flood should be considered eligible for loss and damage? Does anyone want to respond to that?
See, I think it'll be too initial to comment
Yes.
on that, because you don't
Yeah.
have a trend line. So anything which becomes climate is like at least
Right.
20, 25, 30 years.
Right.
It's just one or two episodes which we've seen.
Yeah. Yeah. In any case, I think the loss and damage fund, the operationalization of that is going to take some time. What are the rules? What are the ways in which it's going to be operationalized? Will it be directed nationally or subnationally? Also, these are all questions which I think still remain to be framed in the loss and damage issue. And in any case, I think perhaps one of the ruling criteria that is going to be there in the loss and damage fund will be to prioritize the needs of the least developed nations and the most vulnerable countries. So I'm not sure that India is going to fit into that definition, but time will tell as we go along. So I think we have come to the end of this session time-wise. Kirtibhai, do you have some closing comments?
Yes. Not very closing remarks, but the few things that I would like to kind of mention as observers, someone who listened very carefully. First of all, my most sincere thanks to everyone for making this inaugural sort of episode very worthwhile, very remarkable in terms of what we have heard today. So thank you very much, everyone. Rajneesh ji, Arvind, Tikendar Saab, you're always provocative. It's terrific. There's no one. Now, there's few points that I want to make very briefly. One is the repeated, I think, mention of current model of development and its enhancing vulnerability. And I want to relate it to something that I came across this Saturday, Sunday. I was in Kutch. I was in Dholavira for my daughter's, Dolavera festival. And we were living in a fancy uh, uh, settlement, in the sense that, I think, it's a hotel or whatever. And because I'm also essentially an architect, I was very thrilled and made large number of photographs. But what was interesting, would you believe this, that each room in which we were living has 30 feet height, 30. This is in Kutch, this is in Dholavira. And each of those units have something like 4 or 5 air conditioner. Still, even in winter, there was no really relief. So what I'm trying to kind of say is this, that even in Dholavira, the far end of this country, you have this development model, and of course the rich and the fancy. I think so. I think that's one very strong indicator into what is happening. Second thing is this, that, and I think this is to Rajneesh ji a bit. I'm just wondering, while we talk large, you move into any cities, there's such huge amount of construction that's going on, such huge amount of building which are being built. Just under Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, 12 million urban, 30 million rural houses are built. Is it possible to find out, is anyone concerned, is any action, any thought in terms of their thought about, I think, climate consciousness? Point I'm trying to make is this. Is there a shortcut? While we debate, while we learn more, while we, I think, fine-tune the issues, there are shortcuts in terms of 5 points to consider while you're building, so that something happens. Because I personally feel not only what has happened in the past, but what is happening now will be doing more damage. So are there any shortcut to improving the climate consciousness of the building which are coming up? And they're coming up left and right. Any spot of the city you move, there's a huge amount of construction. First, second, third, and the 4th page of Times of India 3 days ago was advertisement of a new housing project. First, second, third, and 4th page, front pages of Times of India. That is the level, that is the kind of development which is going on. And is there a way? And of course, they talk about green buildings and all that, but you know what it is. So that was second thing. Third thing is a point that Tikendar made, and I think which Aravind pointed out, that I personally feel that 5 people knowing about climate change is a slightly inflated figure. It probably has less as 2%. No one knows about this. Who knows this? I don't think my wife knows about it as much, and I respect her immensely. So what I'm trying to say is this, and I was talking to villagers in Kutch. Just no one has any idea of what this damn thing is. Then what are you talking about? Why are you doing this project? And there's a huge task in terms of taking it down from Dubai to your mohalla, to your house, to your wife, to your children. It's a huge task. And I think, and I don't think we at the moment are equipped to do that, and there's not much thought that is going on, which I think is very important. The third point, I think, which Arvind made, and I think touched me enormously, and this is something that I want to talk to Raghuji and my colleagues in urban planning reforms is an absolute must. And urban planning reforms at all levels are absolute must. It's not only mass planning. You don't even know that we are talking about promoting affordable housing. Our building bylaws do not encourage build affordable housing. It's such a mismatch. And I think this is something doable. And Raghu Sahab, I would want this to be very much this learning from today's I think event, where we put this on the higher priority and see how could we work on that sort of a thing. So that is the third thing that I want to kind of very quickly mention. And the fourth thing, which I'm surprised there's not been a word on this, which is one of the very important event and one of the very important outcome of the Dubai COP is the fossil fuels issue. That 80% of the emissions is coming from that. And we are just about to start not even talking about it. Really means that there's a lot is required to be kind of done. The economics of it, the politics of it, I think the development model of it is something very, very important. So I thought I'll just mention these four things. And thank you, everyone, once again. Thank you, Raghu Saab, for putting this together. Thank you, Karthik and Bunduji and my other colleagues, for this remarkable event. We are doing 10 of this, and we'll be back again in about a week's time. And we look forward to, I think, very good response, and look forward to learning from it so that, we could use this in our project in Chennai. Tikendar Saab, thank you. Rajneesh Saab, thank you.
So let me also add my
Raghu
goodbyes
Saab,
to everyone and thank you to the panelists, to all our audience, both here as well as on YouTube and Facebook. And we look forward to having you again with us over the course of the next 10 or 11 weeks for this 10 webinar series. And please remember that we will be having specialized webinars on specialized topics. So those interested in specific technical issues are invited particularly to join those as well. So once again, thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tikendar Saab, मैं phone
Thank
करूंगा.
you.
I'll ring you up
Thank
and we'll talk about.
I'll ring you up, sir. I'll ring you up.
Okay.
I have to learn, sir. So I will ring
Arvind
you up.
bhai, thank you very much,
Bye,
Baba.
everybody.
हमें बात करनी है. Well, we'll let it talk. And the fourth season of the competition is around the corner.
Sure, sir.
I've secured financial support
Oh,
already.
very lovely. Such good
And
news, sir.
we would be starting, I think, process. I'll talk to you probably tomorrow. I'll call you.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.